So excited. Another episode of Deep Dive. We are almost through the chapter of Romans 1. My goodness, we just keep going at it. And hey, I'm hearing a lot of great feedback out there. I'm hearing a lot of people are really enjoying this.
It's so fun to hear people enjoying going deeper, people enjoying hearing our voice, getting to know Brian more. So we're so excited you guys are listening, and just as God is giving you revelation, he's giving us revelation. And that's the cool thing, being in his word. Like, he shows us things and reveals things to us. And
I love always hearing your voice.
You're very
Hey, that was a shameless plug. Did it work?
I take the fifth.
Well, for those out there who aren't familiar with us, I'm your host, Pastor Jason Kimberly, and you are hearing the voice of Pastor Sarah and Brian McKenna. How you doing today, Brian?
I am doing good.
We're overcoming. That's what we're talking about.
Yep, exactly.
I will keep you in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on me. So, Lord, help it align, because seems like it must be off on a few places.
Yes. Amen.
Well, we're continuing through our book of Romans, chapter 1. Man, I tell you, I'm going to give a recap of this verse, starting in verse 29. And I tell you, it's so fascinating, all the things that we've already studied. You don't really put them together until you make a list of it, and it's just like, wow, oh my goodness. So the Apostle Paul will just dive right into Romans chapter 1, verse 29. To back up just a little bit, Apostle Paul, he's talking about how God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a probate mind to do the things which are not convenient, or which are not.
So they do what ought not be done.
Yep, there we go. That works.
He says.
But as we reflect just from verse 21 all the way through verse 32. Let me just share with you some of the things that the Apostle Paul has hit, and they're not pleasant. They're hard things. He's saying that these guys, they did not glorify God. They became unthankful in verse 21. They became vain in their imaginations in verse 21. They became dark in their hearts in verse 21. We talked about this, how idolatry causes so much of that, where you start weaning away from Creator and you start worshiping creation. You start worshiping other things other than the Creator, and because of that, your heart becomes dark, according to the Apostle Paul. And then in verse 22, they professed to be wise, but they became fools. Verse 23, they changed God's glory and dishonored their bodies. In verse 24, verse 25, they changed the truth for a lie. They worship creation as God and not Creator, who was God. And they served creatures, not God. They submitted to vile passions, and they became focused on their own lust. Women became focused on other women. Men became focused on other men, according to verse 26 and 27. Verse 28, they rejected the knowledge of God. They became reprobate in mind. They were completely filled with perversion sexually in every single way, shape, or form. Ouch. My goodness. I mean, you don't even think about that, but these are the things that we've talked about just in chapter 1 alone. Thoughts?
That was just 5 verses, too.
Yes.
So it gives us clear insight as to what's going on in our society, and it's not new. We seem to think, we get wrapped up in some of this stuff that, oh man, this has never happened, and Solomon was clear. There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
We need to realize this has been an ongoing issue with God and his creation since the fall. I mean, he wiped everybody out, started over with Noah, because it just got crazy. And so now we're here again. It's how do we stand against this? And that's why I'm enjoying going through this so much. It's like how to have an actual conversation with someone struggling with some of these things and give them hope that, It's more about giving your heart to God and letting him fix the rest and then walking with those people. So it's been interesting having some conversations about this and basically ripping the Band-Aid off.
Yeah, well, and keeping God in his rightful place, which he lets us decide what that is. And when we don't keep him there, this is what Romans 1:29 is going to get into. But and I think to your point, it's a continual thing. Mm-hmm. Just like we've talked about with a lot of things, like it's not a one and done. And even all through history, you see forgetting God, choosing to be our own God, and the repercussions of that.
Or complaining against God because it didn't happen like we were just talking about in our time frame.
How we wanted.
40 years in the desert. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Should have been a 5-day walk.
Yeah. Well,
40 years.
Even Judas, some of the arguments could be made that, he was trying to kind of kick the ball down the hill in some ways to get the ball rolling when he betrayed Christ, that it was, that there was a place of him trying to kind of get that expectation that everyone had that he was going to come and overthrow Rome. It was kind of trying to kickstart some of that, so it's so fascinating how, but even the Zealots, that's what they wanted to do. They didn't have the trust and confidence in God, so they wanted to take it in their own hands. And anytime we do that, yep, exactly what you're saying. It goes right back into idolatry. We become our own gods, and we think we can figure it out. And I tell you, anytime I've done that in my life, I've made a royal mess of things. So I don't know about you, but I can vouch for myself for sure. Yeah. So it says this in verse 29. Paul is continuing his thought in how God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which were not convenient, were not proper. And then he gives a nice little list. If I didn't give you a great list here that I just ran across, the next 3 verses, oh my goodness, verse 29, 30, and 31, we're going to have to just take our time through this because there is so much. The Apostle Paul says that this, being filled with all unrighteousness. Interesting, it's not even like some unrighteousness or mostly unrighteousness, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetous, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers. Oh my goodness. Now, I think it's pretty obvious at this point we're only going to capture one verse today, which is going to be verse 29, being filled up. I think that's the first thing that jumps out as being filled up, being completed. Whatever this is, the Greek term that's used here is plero, which is a completion. And Paul goes on to say a completion with all unrighteousness. So he's not mixing words here. He's not hinting at anything. He's going to go through a nice little laundry list of things that, oh my goodness, really defining what those things are which are not convenient. So what jumps out with this?
Again, all, right? It's all. And then he gives the list, all unrighteousness. So it's pretty simple that you don't have to be filled with all. You could have one or more of these yourself. It's a good symbol. I guess like I was a gut check to when you read this stuff, don't look at it like, oh man, look at all this stuff out in the world. It's like, look in the mirror first.
Yep, absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Because one leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And I think as you see the progression from 24 to now, it just continues to progress. Yeah. It's like they traded the truth for a lie. And then because they traded the truth for a lie, they got wrapped up in confusion in the way God created things. Then it went from there to they started worshiping creation or creation versus the creator. And then boom, boom, boom. And now they're just into a diabolical mess at this particular point.
Yeah, the Amplified says saturated with every kind of all these things. So the result of not acknowledging God, not choosing God, not seeking God.
Well, I think that is important to highlight, Brian. We love to judge others by their actions, and we like to judge ourselves by our intentions.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times you hear accusations about the church, and it's kind of generally and I do it myself. I'm guilty. I'm guilty in this podcast where it's always the other person. It's always somebody else. It's not me. I'm not the one that's got the error. I'm not the one that's got the problems, and so we got to be very careful, not only with how we say things, but first and foremost, before we even look anywhere else, that self-reflection, it's got to be inwardly. Lord, is there unrighteousness in me? Lord, is there fornication? Is there wickedness? Is there covetousness in me? Because if there is, purge it from me. Now, fortunately, we have the fullness of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit's job was to take what was Christ and show it unto us and to reveal all things to us. So we have the advantage. We have a spirit of wisdom and revelation. We got to receive from it. But certainly there's a gut check that first and foremost, we got to be looking inward. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really critical as we go through these words.
Well, and I think staying humble, I've been meditating a lot. I think it's the verses from 1 Peter, but I think it's in James too. But humble yourself before the Lord, and in due time he will exalt you or lift you up. But our heart and our attitude, and even being submitted one to another in reverence for Christ, like how we learn from each other and gain from each other. And like you said, stay in those heart checks, and so we can stay away from this list.
It's kind of like what you said, and I try to say it like this: God's church is alive and doing fine. Man's church is going to fall. It's going to fail. Why? Because it's man's church. It's not God's church.
Yeah.
And so that's why as we go through these things, that's why it's so imperative. Look in the mirror first. Apply it to yourself first. How can you grow? How can you change? How can you be a better example to the people you work with, your children, if you're married, your spouse, those type of situations? Because this is a pretty serious situation Paul is addressing, and we are in the midst of this. Paul could be preaching this to the United States right now, today.
Yeah.
Unequivocally. You know what I'm saying? He could be on our quote unquote Mars Hill throwing it down and just rebuking this nation in a lot of this, if not all of it.
Well, I don't think it's isolated to just America. It's. But I think these things have been at play for a long, long time, for sure, in some way, shape, or form. But why don't we do this? Let's go through, because there's actually 23, and so we're going to be here for a while at just 3 verses. So you might as well, camp out, get your pillows.
Well, we're just this one verse right now.
Make some s'mores.
We'll do it as bite-sized as we can for those out there, for sure. But let's sit. Being filled with all unrighteousness. That word unrighteousness is every vice contrary to justice and righteousness. Right standing with God. So obviously you've heard me say this many times. He who knew no sin was made sin for us, that we might be made the righteousness of God. You don't become righteous. You are made righteous because everything that you've done in your own effort and your own deeds, it was never to par. It was never good enough. It was only by his righteousness that it's even possible. And so when Paul uses this word unrighteousness, I think it's interesting justice is mixed in there too, but righteousness is really a right standing with God. And so, if your heart is darkened, you can't have a right standing with God, because God is light. God is life. God is love. That we can't have those hidden places in our lives.
No, that's interesting, because you said there's 23.
I believe there's 23. I could be wrong.
Oh, no. Well, this is cool, because instantly I'm a numbers dude. So I got this awesome thing that tells you what the numbers mean.
I'm more of a Genesis or Exodus dude. I'm playing with. Keep going.
Not numbers in the Bible. I'll clarify that for Jay. I got the sarcasm. No, this is actually the meaning of the numbers 1 through 40. Anyway, 23 is death and resurrection, right?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. You said that, and let's hope there's 23 because that's pretty cool. But then check this out. This verse, I just counted them, has 11. And you don't know what 11 means? Imperfection, disorder, and incompleteness. And then he's going to say that God's just random. What are the chances that this one verse that he starts off with this list leads to imperfection and disorder?
Yeah, no,
Why?
that's something that's so cool is how when you see these things, even Jason sharing about the 10 recently in your message, you're like, wow, God, that's amazing. The details and intricacy.
Yeah. And I do want to highlight as we go through these are as a result of idolatry. I hope you guys hear me on this. I'm trying almost every episode to make sure that we get clarity that as we're going through these things, this is an effect of a central cause of not putting God first in our lives, putting ourselves, putting something else, some type of filler in replacement of that.
Yeah.
So let's move on to fornication, porneia. I could be hacking that up for you Greek scholars out there. Doesn't take too much to figure out that one where that root word takes us, but pretty clear: unlawful sexual sin of a single or married person. I think that's pretty clear. I don't know if there's much that needs to be explained there, but certainly there's fornication in the sense of if you are married and engaged in sexual activity with somebody else outside of marriage,
Or if you're not married, both parties.
Yeah.
If there's one party that is married, it's said to be adultery more, right?
Yep. Yeah. So, moving on. Wickedness. Porneia, which is actually really pretty much, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I would guess that their core is pretty close. I could be wrong on that, but this is basically defining depravity, iniquity, wicked acting of some type of evil nature, criminal in behavior. So, the actions are pretty, everybody knows, everybody can see, what actions are being taken, and they're clear that they're not of God. They're clear that they're not of life. They're not of light. They're not of love. I think that's pretty obvious. Covetousness, that intense lust for gain. And Brian, you've said it so many times, lust can be in so many different areas. It's not just simply isolated to sexual. We can lust for a lot of different things. We can lust for things. In fact, so many times, I know in times past, we've gotten, there's been movements where we got caught up in the things instead of the promises. So
you can even lust after a position in a church.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean? You can be lusting to, move up in a position in the church and not realize that you're doing that by, that's why it's so important to understand what these words mean.
Yeah.
And truthfully how they apply to your life. Because I think that's how a lot of people get tripped up, and that's how they start down this road.
Yeah.
They get tripped up. They don't understand something. They believe that lie. And once they exchange the truth for a lie, boom, Satan's got a hook in your mouth, and he's going to start dragging you off the path.
Right. Absolutely. Maliciousness. Oh, I'm having so much trouble with that word, maliciousness. The vicious disposition and desire, rather than there's a viciousness to it. There's a craving. I think it ties in pretty close to that lust, where you want what you can't have. I think, what is it, James? Why are there murders among you? Because you lust after these things.
Yeah.
So this is the vicious nature, the vicious component of that. So yeah, obviously these are going to feed off of each other. They're interchangeable and interconnected in some ways, some way, shape, or form. By the way, have you heard a lot of good Romans chapter 1, verse 29 messages out there? I don't think you have, right? It's not the easiest thing to cover.
Maybe if you go back to the 17 or 1800s and they're having some of the really awesome revivals, you know what I'm saying? But I don't think anything since the 40s, you know.
Not always the most enjoyable thing to cover, but I tell you, it is so critical, because if we're going to understand the Word of God, we got to understand the Word of God in its fullness, in its intent, with an open heart. And we got to be willing to analyze and reflect on these, every single one of these, and make sure that they're not in our life and they're not a play within us. The next one, full of envy, to the pain felt and the malignity conceived at the sight of the blessing of another. So you see somebody else getting blessed, you see somebody else getting that benefit, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, why is that not happening to me?
Yeah.
You know, and so we, rather than celebrating the blessing of another person, we find ourselves full of envy ourselves, because we're feeling like we're missing out in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of them you're just kind of explaining, so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just keep going then.
Well, I mean, it's like you said, notice how they're snowballing. They're going from an internal struggle to an external, right?
Yep.
So you can't murder yourself, really. I mean, you can commit suicide, but you can't really continue to commit murder. You know what I mean? So if you notice, they're switching from unrighteousness, fornication, that has to do with an internal thing. Wickedness, right? That's a heart decision. Covetousness, that's also a heart decision. Being malicious or vile is a heart decision. Now all of a sudden it's switching. Envy is, you can't have envy unless you're jealous of somebody else.
Yeah. It's interesting that Paul would use this word, full of envy, right after he just said covetousness, because you would, by nature, you would kind of reflect and say, well, they're interchangeable. They mean the same thing. Not necessarily.
They're pretty different by your definition.
Right. Yeah.
Pretty different.
Right.
I didn't even know that. Like, look at what it says for covetousness. It says, and carry out accusations against people, whether true or false, blasting their reputation. I didn't know that was covetousness. I would have put that as whispers or gossip or backbiting, or I would have never known that was covetousness.
Yeah. So fascinating. Murder, slaughter, hating, also hating of another person. I think that's murder is with the intention of, I want you dead. I want you to cease from breathing. I think sometimes people can get that confused with killing, because there is a difference between the two. Not that either one is enjoyable or we want to see any of those unfold, but there is a difference between murder and killing.
Well, like Brian was talking about, kind of heart intent.
Yeah. Not that either one of those are endorsed by any way, shape, or form. That's not the intent in sharing with that. But I do think it's important to delineate between those two, because they are different. A debate, a strife, contention, debate, variances. It means to cause strife, to cause discord. It might go beyond just simply disputing truth, as we kind of see in Acts at times, just in discussion. But there's actually this contention. There's this strife. There's this hard-heartedness. There's this hostility that, if it's a play, and you see this a lot. You can see this a lot in church environments too, where it's just, sometimes it's hurt, and sometimes, it can be a lot of different things, but we can see this animosity, this kind of stirring up, this wanting to kind I don't know if it's sometimes a little bit of an independence, if it's just hurt, if it's just whatever it is. You could even throw in rebellion with that. There's a lot of different things that you can throw in there, but to intentionally cause strife, to intentionally cause contention, to intentionally cause debate, to stir up the pot, to stir up the strife. That's what he's talking about with this. It's the Greek word eris.
Not healthy debate, not, hey, let's talk about the word like we're doing, and
right.
We might disagree on stuff, but it's iron sharpening iron. This is to intentionally cause confusion in the group.
Yep, absolutely. And then we have deceit, which is lying, falsity, to take with a bait, guile, like probably say beguiled in there, craftiness, subtlety. I think so many times you can get kids that they love to kind of push those parameters, and they're like, well, I didn't lie. Well, but you didn't lie, quote unquote. You didn't lie, but you caused deceit, and so that's what it's talking about. It can be a form of lying, but sometimes even not telling the truth can be a form of lie in that sense.
Yep.
Well, and I think as people look at the notes you have, even looking at murder in 1 John 3:15, going back to that one a little bit, but it says everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. So it's not just the act, it's also heart, attitude, and intent that Brian was kind of touching on too.
That's what I was praying about when I was going through this, because in the situation I'm dealing with Amanda and the way she passed away, the detective made a very bold statement. He goes, murder is illegal. Homicide can be justified. And I said, wait, what? And he goes, yeah, you hear, I'm a homicide detective, so I have to determine whether it was justified, self-defense, or if it was murder.
Yeah.
Because homicide encompasses both, but detectives, they lean homicide. When they hear homicide, they're leaning more towards justifiable from the police department. Mm. That's how they separate the two. So again, it's back to, I would have never thought that. I hear homicide, oh, he's a homicide detective, they're investigating. Well, if someone breaks into your house in the middle of the night and is threatening your life and you defend yourself and it costs them theirs, that's a homicide. You were justifiable in your actions. And so
right.
I think it's just interesting as you get into these words, how slippery the slope is where we could actually, like covetousness. I want to go back to that one.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of that. Like right here, right now, I had no idea what that meant. I've done that.
Yeah. And ultimately the reason why Paul's even bringing this out is, he talks in other areas in the Bible about this idea of circumcision of the heart, this idea of being clean, being pure in the heart. And even with these words, I mean, as Brian just shared, just one thing that jumped out for him personally is just, making sure that we see in our heart, Lord, are these aspects that I need to deal with, to see, to cleanse, to purify from my heart, so that I can have that purity of heart that you so desired for me to have, that you so came to fill your presence in me. I want that presence, that place to be pure for you. And so,
well, and it comes back to also not thinking of ourselves more highly than we ought, because you break down murder and it's like, no, not just killing people. If you hate them, you're bad.
I just realized it's not covetousness, it's whispers. I'm looking at the wrong page of your notes.
Oh,
it's whispers. I would have never, that I'm guilty of. So I'm going to correct that. So, because the Lord's like, no, you don't really do that. It's not sitting there, and I was like, no, but it's this you got to stop. So, what I'm saying? It's like, all right, clarification.
For by the grace of God given to me, I say to everyone, this is Romans 12:3, that you do not think more highly of himself and his importance and ability than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has apportioned to each a degree of faith and a purpose designed for service. Anyway, hard.
That's good.
And then we have malignity, which is a disposition of producing evil habits. That's an interesting one. We don't always like to talk about evil habits.
But I think like all habits, like that's the problem. Like once you start habits, they grow kind of thing. So where you start good habits and those things grow, or where you start down this path and those things grow. And that's the hard thing, because so many times I don't think people are like, you know what, I'm going to be all these things. That's not their heart at all. But because of the other things that they do in the other verses, then it starts, just like we said, snowballing and then producing these evil habits, and it gets worse and worse, unfortunately.
Well, it's like that thing we talked about in class last Thursday. I'm going to read it real quick. It's a pretty famous saying. It says, watch your thoughts, for they become words. Watch your words, for they become actions. Watch your actions, for they become habits. Watch your habits, for they become character. Watch your character, for it becomes your destiny.
Yep.
So these people, whether intentional or unintentional, started developing wicked habits. And you just go from the habits one. Watch your habits, for they become your character.
Yep.
And that character becomes your destiny. And that's what the enemy is looking to take out.
Exactly.
Your purpose, your destiny.
Your character. Because if you're trying to represent Christ and he can get your character to fall, then he takes all the people around you down too, or knocks them down a peg at least, slows down their faith. If they look up to you, now all of a sudden they're like, wow, if they can't do it, then why should I even try?
Yeah. And then we have finally the last one for today's episode, the last part of verse 29, which, this is going to be 29, 30, and 31. It's like a big, long sentence. So we're trying to break them down in bite-size tidbits for you. But whispers, it's slanders, those who pretend in secrecy. They carry out accusations against people, whether it's true or it's false. They blast people's reputation by just gossip. One of the things here at Church Alive that Pastor Mike really wanted to hit is that we would be so busy, consumed with being obedient to the Lord's specific instructions to us, that we wouldn't have time for the gossiping and the backbiting. So many of the other things that you see classically, that we would be so focused, so resolved, so full of passion, so full of purpose, seeing eternity on the other side, seeing eternity, that every single moment of our lives is thought through those lenses, that we don't have time for all the gossiping and the backbitings and all the other things that come with it. And, that's front and center of all the things that really Paul is trying to hit and trying to really hammer home. And so the reality is, we've spent several verses, we were talking about homosexuality, but it would be very errant to believe that just that sin mentioned earlier is the sole thing that tarnishes humanity. It is not. And we're going through 23 different things that Paul lists that it's just like, my goodness. And in reality, every single one of these sins is some type of act of idolatry. It's a pursuit of satisfaction in worldly desires rather than a satisfaction in our Creator. And each of these sins, it's contaminating and it's condemnable. It requires the sacrifice of Jesus Christ to liberate us from its grip. And the amount of grace needed to save and the hardened sinner is no different than that's required to just simply save a child. So that work is available for every single one of us. It doesn't matter race. It doesn't matter your financial hierarchy, what you have or what you have not accomplished. The work of Christ is there for every single one of us to redeem us, because that price has been paid and it remains unchanged. The work is finished. And so I think that's so critical for us to come back to, because we've been so deep in this. I think it's important for us to come out of that and recognize that, yes, there is a severity of sin, but the severity of sin, it doesn't determine the amount of Christ's sacrifice, because Christ's sacrifice supersedes any of these things. If we just believe and we receive and we just thank the Lord and speak out, Lord, I believe in my heart that you died for my sins. I believe that to be true. Make me a new creation. Make old things pass away, and behold, all things new. And so I'm so excited about going through this, even as hard as it is, because I think it's so important for us to really come back and say, Lord, is there anything in me that needs to be clean, that needs to be pure, that needs to be brought to you? Because I understand the fullness of that exchange, and I don't want to tarnish that in any way, shape, or form, because you came as that spotless lamb. You came and did it right. You showed us the way, and I want to honor that. I want to reflect that and to emulate that in my life as well.
Yeah, and I was a little stressed out about getting into some of this stuff, I'll be honest, and like how to, help people receive it. And then as I've been praying the last few days, like I text you guys randomly Saturday, I was like, you know what, I'm going to go to the water. I need to be by water. And that's whenever, for whatever reason, if I'm by a waterfall, lake, whatever, I hear very clearly from the Lord. And he said, when you go through this stuff, when it gets hard, use yourself. If it applies to you, just own it. Mm-hmm. Because then it doesn't, I don't want to be on a pedestal.
Sure.
Well, and that's so much of it, right? Confess your sins, your faults one to another so you can be healed.
Yeah, I don't want any of this.
We're human. I don't mess up.
I don't want to function under any of this. You know what I mean? I just don't. And it's not so much of coming at it as a condescending message like, you need to change. I need to change. And I want to share it with other people as we go into this and really understand what these things mean and how they will separate you. It's not if. They will separate you from a relationship with God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't want that. I don't want anything separating that relationship.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, any final thoughts before we wrap up today with this? I think we're at a good stopping place. We still have several more we got to go through, so this is going to take a grind. But certainly hope that you found this relevant and meaningful. And again, some of these verses, as we go through the Bible, some are going to be so fun and glorious, and you're going to go through it and be like, oh, I am so undone. I'm so this is so cool. And then other verses, you're like, ouch, 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 ouch.
Yes. So can you remind them, if they're listening to the podcast but they want to see your notes, where do they go to see and do that?
Yep. Actually, I will give you a heads up. I'm looking at reconfiguring some things right now. So the answer is not necessarily available today, but I will say this. I will have a solution very soon because it is critical. The way that I have it on the website, it is available, but it's very hard to navigate to. So I would hate to lead you that way because I'll probably do some major reconstruction of it. But certainly, so much of my heart is to take my personal studies, and really that's how this evolved, how this came about, is just these were my personal studies. This is how I would preach. I would break these words down. I would break these groupings down. I would think through this so that as I'm sharing the gospel, as I'm sharing a verse, I could articulate it in a healthy way. And then it caused me to realize, well, my goodness, why would I not share my breakdowns of the word so that you can see how to break it down yourself? And so, yeah, certainly it will be available. As soon as I have it up and reconfigured, I'll be happy to share with that. So I'd say stay tuned to